Okay, we are live again. This is week 2 of going through chapter 10, the Shattering of the Vessels. And we are on page 82 and 83. I don't think we went through Sparks of Holiness last week, and if we did, it's probably going to be worth going through again just to kind of set us up for the next section. The Shattering of the Vessels is going to be complicated. And Eric, would you mind using the mic real quick then? Just as a reminder, we are again just discussing a bit. We're not necessarily trying to teach anything, so we're hoping that this discussion would allow for any of you who are watching live or any of you who are watching afterwards, this would help give a verbal element, a verbal side of things for what's being read, because it's sometimes when you talk things out or hear other people talk it out, it's a lot easier to kind of like grasp concepts. So, and Eric, you're still not muted, just FYI.
Yeah, am I like really loud again?
Just whenever you move around.
That's so weird. Okay, I'll try to stay still. I'll just mute.
Yeah, just unmute if you have something you want to say, and go. Feel free again, like anybody, feel free to interrupt me, and also if my internet gets slow or whatever, interrupt me as well. So I'm gonna start reading. Sparks of Holiness, page 82. Perhaps the most famous allusion to the breaking of the vessels appears in the second verse of Genesis. The Torah thus states, "The earth was without form, tohu, and empty, bohu, with darkness on the face of the depths. But God's Spirit moved, merachephet, on the water's surface." As we have mentioned, the word tohu means chaos. It can also be translated as void or without form. Bohu is emptiness. This is the emptiness of a vessel ready to receive. The word bohu can also be read as two words, bo and hu. Literally, it is in it. This is also because it is something that can hold the light in it. Thus, tohu is the intermediate state that leads to the shattering. Bohu is the rectified state of the vessels. In Kabbalistic terminology, this state is called the universe of tikkun, rectification. Darkness on the face of the depths refers back to the shattering. Tehom, depths, can be read as tohum, and indicates that these depths resulted from the chaos and confoundment that the original vessels experienced. In addition to rearranging the letters of Tehom, we can see that Hamavet, which means death, we can see the word Hamavet, which means death. Choshech means darkness and shares the same root letters as the word Hosech, meaning to withhold. Together, these words allude to the concealment of the light that resulted from the shattering. But God's Spirit moved merachephet. In the word merachephet, the Ari finds yet another allusion to the fate of the kings of Edom. The first and last letters of this word spell met, which literally means dead. As we have mentioned, a spiritual concept cannot cease to exist. It cannot die. As the Zohar explains, however, something is said to have died when it leaves its true level and descends to a lower level of existence. The exact parallel to this is the burial of a person's body after he dies. We lower the dead body into the ground in order to show that it is descending to a lower level. In the same way, the descent of the king's vessels of Atzilut to the outside realm of Beriah was their death. Despite their shattering and descent, however, the vessels still retain a small amount of holiness. This again is similar to a person that dies. His life force does not leave him completely. Rather, there still remains in him an infinitesimal trace of life that the Kabbalists call Hevel Degarmi, literally, vapor of the bones. It is through this very small portion of life that he will once again rise in the world to come. In the same way, the light that once filled the vessels did not leave them completely. Nitzotzot, literally, sparks of the original light accompanied the shattered vessels as they fell into Beriah and below. These sparks would provide just enough spiritual life force to ensure that the broken vessels could be restored later as partsufim. In the meantime, they represent the sparks of holiness in all things that must be elevated and brought back to the realm of the holy. I want to pause right there real quick. Eli Shiva shared a really great article on one of the posts for this study, And in it, I found one of the best explanations for what sparks are that I have seen so far. And when I first started reading about sparks, the sparks of holiness, the way I was relating to it was that it was probably just meaning, human beings, like us as humans are the sparks. Well, that's not inaccurate. That's also not doesn't encompass the whole concept of what a spark of holiness is. So I'm gonna just read this paragraph real quick. It says, "Wherever your feet lead you, they are directed from above to bring you into proximity to those divine sparks that belong to your soul alone. It may be an herb waiting to provide its healing powers, a stroke of wisdom that has yet to find an understanding heart, a human relationship that must be healed, a grand landscape that has been waiting to grant inspiration. If you learn to say a blessing over your food before eating, then a fruit somewhere in the world may await that blessing of yours. If you have learned to study Torah, there may be a place in the world sustained by divine sparks that have been waiting since the beginning of creation to provide you an inspiring place to study, so that your words of Torah will redeem them." So I just thought that was just a real fantastic kind of gamut of what a spark could be in the world and how we can approach the concept, so to speak. So yeah, I just want to share that. If anyone has any things that they want to comment on, go for it, or I can keep reading.
Um, the idea that actually, I think it'll come up a little bit more clear in the next one. I'll wait and I'll hold my comment to the next section. So sorry.
Oh, that's fine. So moving on, it says, according to the Ari, this entire process of death and resurrection is hinted at in the word merachefet. As we saw, the first and last letters of the word spell met. The three remaining letters of resh, pe, and chet, the numerical value of these three letters is 288. These are the 288 sparks of holiness inside the shattered vessels. The symbolic significance of the number 288 is alluded to in the word ibur, whose numerical value is also 288. Ibur means gestation or pregnancy. Thus indicating that the broken vessels with their 288 sparks are similar to seeds that are planted in the ground. Although they may appear to be rotting, they are going through a process which is necessary in order to bring forth new life. The 288 sparks thus represent the profound concept of death and resurrection. On the level of Atzilut, it is by virtue of these sparks that the shattered vessels of Nekudim will be rectified as Partsufim. And for me, I'm seeing kind of like a connection or a parallel with this, with the concept of being born again or rebirth, or even the resurrection, right? And we're reading in the Derech Hashem group. It was a couple weeks ago. I think it was in section 1.3, talking about how the final rectification, the complete rectification, only happens as the result of a resurrection, so to speak. So even someone who lived a completely righteous life here in this world still has to die. And the Zohar comments on, like, I think 7 people that didn't merit death but died because of the counsel of the snake. And it's that this there's a requirement, if you will, of a descent, and a decomposition, and then a resurrection, so to speak. So, anyways, I'm just seeing an interesting connection with that there, and the idea of Met and the 280 sparks. Yes.
Sorry, I didn't mean to make.
You guys want to share? Or should I keep reading?
Oh, sorry, I didn't realize my dog was barking in the back. I didn't mean to mute.
Okay. Not a problem.
One of the things that reminded me when I read that same article about the Shekhinah was this idea, personally, like, doing repair and seeking out these these sparks. It made me think of the idea of, those lost aspects of Israel, the souls of Israel that have been lost to the nations and are hidden and can't be found. And it made me think of in Jeremiah, where, let's see if I can read it. Sorry. Jeremiah 31 talks about Hashem seeking out the lost souls of. Let's see here. I lost my place there. I'm so sorry. Uh, vineyards. Oh yeah, he who scattered Israel will gather them together and watch him as a shepherd, as a shepherd his flock. For the Lord has redeemed Jacob and saved him out of the hand of him who is stronger than he. And they shall come and jubilate in the height of Zion. So he talks about this ingathering of these like hidden aspects of Israel that are being brought in, and the culmination is in regards to Rachel weeping for her children, that these were the lost sparks that have been buried amongst the nation that are brought back and gathered back in, and the culmination is in like Jeremiah 31:14 and 15. Anyway, I think that reminded me of that whole section of this Rachel that was refused to give up on her lost children, and she will find them and search for them and bring them back and be a part of that rescue effort to redeem those sparks of those holy soul.
Yeah, and our own, soul that was within us, our divine soul is has the opportunity to play a role in that as well. Controlling these sparks, even if maybe I hold a lost spark of a child of Israel, I could play a role in bringing one back too. So, anyways,
Yes.
The parable of the king's son. This is on the bottom of page 83. The primitive Sephiroth represent the concept of something that God created that did not fulfill its purpose. This is equivalent to the basic concept of evil. In a sense, however, since they were meant to shatter, they did fulfill their. You can say, therefore, that they did not fulfill their primary purpose, which was to hold the light. They did fulfill their secondary purpose, however, which was to shatter. We saw that the Sefer of Netzach dominance alludes to the idea of primary purpose, where God imposes his will and prevails against anything that might constitute an obstacle to his giving. Hod, empathy, on the other hand, is a secondary purpose, where God gives in to us in order to allow us to benefit from his light. This is one reason why the klipa husks derive their sustenance from Hod, because it represents the concept of secondary purpose. The concept of primary and secondary purpose can be illustrated with the Zohar's parable of the king who wanted to test his son's loyalty. First, he warns the prince not to go near any loose women. Then he hires a prostitute to tempt him. Actually, the prostitute is doing the king's bidding by tempting the prince. This, however, is only the secondary purpose of the king. His son is the real primary purpose. In a sense, the king is disguising his primary purpose by hiring the prostitute. It is only when the prince sees through this disguise that he is totally impervious to her charms. In the same way, the evil that comes about as a result of the shattering is a concealment of God's primary purpose. This allows for the possibility of free choice. When man then overcomes the challenge of this concealment, he is master of the good he receives. This was the king's primary purpose. We mentioned that in order to receive God's light, a vessel must in some way be connected to God. The basic difference between the spiritual and the physical is the fact that space does not exist in the spiritual realm. Hence, there is no way in which the Sephiroth can be physically connected to God. The only possible relationship is therefore resemblance. In order to receive God's light, the vessel must at least, to some extent, resemble God. This, however, presents a difficulty. If God is the ultimate giver, then the vessel is the ultimate receiver, and the two are two absolute opposites. In order for a vessel to properly receive, it must also give. What is therefore needed is a vessel that can give as well as receive. The ultimate expression of such a vessel is man. If man is to receive God's light, he must first resemble him by being a giver. This is accomplished through keeping God's commandments, thus fulfilling the purpose of creation and providing sustenance to the spiritual universes. Before he can do this, however, he must also resemble God by having both free will and free choice. A man locked up in a prison may have the same free will as everybody else, but there's little he can do with it. For man to resemble God to the greatest possible extent, he must exist in an arena where he has maximum freedom of choice. To make this choice real, God must, so to speak, disguise his presence in order for man to be an intellectual prisoner. God has to conceal his light and thereby allow for the possibility of evil. If nothing but good were possible, it would produce no benefit. To use the Talmudic metaphor, it would be like carrying a lamp in broad daylight. This is one reason why the original vessels were created in such a way that they were incapable of interacting with each other. Due to this built-in flaw, they were overwhelmed by God's light and subsequently gave birth to an outside realm where God's presence could be almost totally eclipsed. The drama of the shattering of the vessels and their subsequent rectification as Partsufim, which could give as which could give as well as receive, thus serves as a spiritual blueprint for man's ability to overcome evil and become a vessel of godliness in the world. It is only when man overcomes the concealment of the divine in his own life that he arouses a corresponding influx of light and blessing into the spiritual universes. When man accomplishes God's will below, he causes a parallel rectification above. The vessels are then able to receive a greater and greater revelation of light and transmit it from universe to universe. Without the shattering of the vessels, there would have been no possibility for man to choose between good and evil, and thereby resemble his creator. There is, however, an additional reason why the vessels were created flawed. It was so that the actual source of evil should be something good which is fallen. Had evil been created as an independent entity, man would not have had the ability to rectify it in the form of teshuva or repentance. Since evil originated in the highest vessels, it can now be re-elevated to this level. I'm going to stop there because there's a lot wrapped up in that section. Just this is probably one of the best explanations, or one of the portions that really helped me kind of comprehend how good and evil, at the highest level, really are the same. There's no difference between the two, and that it's really just a matter of perspective, because we're on a lower level, right? That things appear to be good or evil, and in so doing, when we approach something that appears to be evil, when we follow the mitzvah, right? When I do a mitzvah, and I either resist that evil thing, or I pursue that good thing, in both cases I'm elevating that other thing, right? So that evil thing truly inherently isn't actually evil. It's there so that I can either resist, practice kavura, or I can expand and process chesed. Um, and in doing so, I'm elevating both of those things, and I'm bringing them back, those sparks, if you will, back up to the highest level, and I'm retrieving that, because, and this goes back to what Hashem said to Cain, when Cain, he said, sin is crouching at your door, but you must master it. And he didn't say you must destroy it or you must abolish it. He said you must master it, and the idea of mastering it is actually appears to be an idea of rectification, of elevating. Because if you're going to master something, obviously that means that thing isn't in and of itself without merit or without value. It actually has some quality to it that is going to exist, or should exist, or deserves to exist, because it's not being abolished or obliterated, so to speak. So we kind of see hints of that in the very beginning in Genesis. Um, I'm going to pause there and see if anyone else has anything that they want to throw out within this concept, because there's a lot here.
When in reading the book on the commentary of the Ari and the shattering of the vessels, when he describes the process of how these vessels were created and then created and destroyed, until they got to the one king that has a wife, and was able to become a vessel that didn't just receive and become shattered, but to give as well. And he says that this is the archetype of Mashiach ben David. He said that this process culminates in the soul of Jesse, Yeshai, the father of David. That's idea of taking what seemingly as a bunch of forbidden unions, like you have a Gentile, you have somebody that did, somebody's a convert, and you have somebody that, Judah and his sons, and how they acted, and how Tamar went in a roundabout way, and so you have all these kind of like tainted unions or questionable marriages to bring this holy soul into being. And so the culmination of that process in our world is the Mashiach ben David. And So just like we're the archetype of a vessel that's tainted yet willing, that has this ultimate ability to be not just a recipient but to do great giving, meaning that you can do great repair. That culminates in the role of David, who, and it's we've talked about it for a long time, but I never understood like the mechanisms behind, Hashem having to quote sneak in some of this work, like with Moshe, with Noah. They have all these midrash about how they were hidden. Avram was hidden, like having to sneak this holiness into the world, like protecting it and sheltering it until it has enough energy or power or whatever to be able to do its function in creation. And just very, very interesting how that dynamic plays out. And the other thing I say, I always look at this and I thought of like this, like, is a spiritual DNA that's being set. Like, this is all of these functions and mechanisms and systems and concepts that are being formed at this level become like the coding for our world. And so we're just kind of playing out what was already set in this primordial existence. That's my 2 cents.
Good 2 cents. Thank you.
2 shekels.
Eric's got something gestating over there.
I know, but he's trying not to move, so I haven't heard anything.
You got something to share, Eric, or you still need some time?
I've fallen and I can't go. No, nothing right now.
Okay.
Couple of things I'm looking up. I may pop back in here in a minute.
Okay, sounds good. Just kind of like a little bit of a recap. He does like a overview or a recap of the why free will is so important, and then just showing how man, the process, if you were, the thinking of how man, he got to the point where man could be both a giver and a receiver, and it started off, because the idea is that how do we draw near to a spiritual concept, because the spiritual concepts, there's no space in the spirit realm. So the way that you draw near to something is by being similar to it. And yeah, that was just that. I don't know that I'm necessarily have anything to share about that other than the fact that was good to review that for me this time again. So I can keep reading. We can go through the 11 incense spices. So I'll move on to that. If anyone has anything, again, any thoughts, any questions, interrupt me. So page 85, the 11 incense spices. All evil comes from the universe of Tohu, which existed before the creation of the Partsufim. It was at this stage, while the Sephiroth existed as simple points, that the shattering of the vessels occurred. The purpose of the shattering, as we have seen, was to allow free will to exist. Without a realm of evil, it would be impossible to choose between good and evil. In discussing the death of the kings of Edom, we pointed out that the shattering of the vessels began with the quasi-Sephirah of Da'at knowledge. The first 3 Sephiroth, Keter, Chokhmah, and Bina, did not shatter because they fulfilled their primary function to a certain extent, because they were able to cooperate with each other in bringing the lower Sephiroth to a stage of independent existence. They were merely reduced. The 8 Sephiroth from Da'at to Malkut, however, did not fulfill their primary function. As a result, they were overwhelmed and shattered. It is significant to note that this is the only time that 11 Sephiroth are mentioned as constituting one unit. It is only in the universe of Tohu that Keter Crown and Da'at knowledge are both present simultaneously. As we have explained, this leads to the paradoxical situation where God's knowledge of the future, Da'at, constrains his free will, Keter. In order to rectify this and allow for the possibility of free choice, God must constrict and withdraw his da'at knowledge from creation. This is accomplished by shattering the vessels from da'at to malkut. As a result of their descent into Beriah, the possibility of evil, and hence free choice, is brought into existence. In elucidating this point, the Ari identifies these 11 Sephirot of Tohu with the 11 incense spices of the Torah. The incense consisted of 10 spices or perfumes with good fragrances, and an 11th spice, galbanum, with a vile odor. These spices were each ground separately and then blended together to be used in the temple. Since these 11 spices parallel the 11 Sephirot of the universe of Tohu, they are therefore said to represent the complete rectification of evil. This is indicated by the addition of the 11th spice, galbanum, which alludes to the elevation of evil back to the realm of the holy. The Talmud teaches that Moses was taught the mystery of the incense by the angel of death. It is for this reason that when a plague broke out among the Israelites in the wilderness, Moses ordered Aaron to walk through the camp with the incense. This is the concept that the 11 perfumes have the power to overcome death and evil. Following the idea of the 10 fragrant spices and the single unpleasant one, the Talmud states, every fast that does not include sinners of Israel is not a fast. That's great. This is derived from the fact that the incense included galbanum. Just as the galbanum was necessary to give the other spices exactly the right fragrance, a congregation is not complete without someone who has also fallen and who must re-elevate through repentance. In particular, when a difficult punishment has been decreed against Israel because of some evil deed, this very evil must be taken and elevated. Thus, the idea of transferring evil by elevating it back to its source and holiness is intimated in the incense. It is for this reason also that a fast must include the sinners of Israel. So that's really interesting right there. I remember a while back studying on the different metals that were used in the building of the Mishkan. You have gold, silver, and bronze, and might try and find my notes to make sure I'm putting this together right. But the gold, the silver actually was what represented the Sadakim, the true Sadakim, and then the gold represented regular Israel who were doing right, and then the bronze represented the sinners of Israel, and that the idea that was being brought down is that Hashem wanted all of Israel involved in the process of making the Mishkan, not just the Sadiq and not just the the good, the ones who were firmly good but weren't necessarily completely righteous. So you see this pattern kind of out there. And in the fragrance, it's interesting how it connects all the way back to 100% to the 11 Sephirot. One thing that is confusing to me still, and I still kind of have to sit there, and maybe it's just because I have a challenge with it, is I'll go back and read this passage. It's the first paragraph in 86. It says, it is significant to note that this is the only time that 11 Sephirot are mentioned as constituting one unit. It is only in the universe of Tohu that Keter Crown and Da'at knowledge are both present simultaneously. As we've explained, this leads to the paradoxical situation where God's knowledge of the future Da'at constrains his free will, Keter. And maybe I just maybe it's not super confusing. The Da'at of his knowledge, or his knowledge, constrains his free will, Keter. Yeah, knowledge of the future constrains his free will. And it's probably confusing because it's a paradoxical situation. So, any thoughts from anybody on this section, on the 11 spices? Seems to me that there is some type of connection, although it's not an exact one-to-one parallel between the 12 or 13 tribes, right? Because you'll always have 12 tribes, but in any of those instances, either Levi is left out and Joseph's two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, are included, or it's Manasseh and Ephraim are bound up as one, and then Levi is included. I don't know if there's any actual kosher connections to be made there, but it seems like there's some type of connection there, although it's not It's not 11 or 10. It's 12 or 13.
One more. Okay. You want to talk, Toby? You want to? Here.
Hey there.
Hey.
Testing.
Your captain.
Testing Aleph Bet Gimel. Hey, I tagged you on a wonderful video of my dogs you can watch later. So I was just listening in the background about 11 Sephirot and how they're generally, you have one or the other, right? You have a Da'at, Da'at or Ketzer, and you always talk about 10. Except, and it's funny, it's one of those rare times when you think of something and you actually can find it on the internet in 1 minute. I was amazed because I Googled, now I just scrolled and lost it. Here it is. So this is from, I'll send you the link after. It's an article called Endgame for Evil. It's not necessarily where I got it from, but it mentions it in here. And it's on a kosher site. Oh, it's on Ascent, ascenttosafed.com. Pretty cool. All right, so here, under the subtitle in the article, Wretched Crowns, on the side of holiness, there are specifically 10 attributes, Sephirot. In contrast, on the realm of the Sitra Achra, there are 11 spiritual crowns of defilement. Why does evil have 11 crowns as opposed to divinity's 10 attributes? As will be explained, God's light and life force doesn't unite with the Sitra Achra. It remains aloof. Since the life force is considered distinct, it is counted as the 11th attribute. So it's weird. It's talking about this kind of, what would you call it, like indirect sustenance or necessary sustenance?
It gets into it's the idea of like the klipot noga, this idea of of an indirect sustenance, like the minimal amount of contact.
It says since the life force is considered distinct. Yeah. So it's like, because it's separate, it requires the 11th, the da'at, which is knowledge, which is
further constraint means that evil is given a realm of
well, da'at to connect also.
But it says, he's saying here that da'at was manifest to constrain Hashem to allow for the choice and evil, the possibility of evil and the realm of free will.
Yeah, this is a very good article, and I'll post it on your group there.
Yeah, please do.
I don't know if anyone else was bothered by the idea that the angel of death taught Moshe the secrets to the spices, the incense, and it's like, so I know it's been a great topic on several places and Facebook, but the idea, and I found this is on the Chabad, one of the books of the Ari. He says, as the sages have said, the evil inclination, which is the Yetzer Hara, the angel of death, and the accusing angel, HaSatan, are all one. So it's and it has that bitter element. And there's a specific curse about not recreating this for your own purposes. That you can do a lot of damage, and you can. Just search inner space on anyway, so you can. It's just, I don't know what to make of that. It's like same kind of thing where you see like the king of Tyre being outsourced for the building of the temple,
right?
Especially when it involved in like temple and rectification, like you said, that evil has to be a part of this aspect, has to be taken in. There's not a true rectification if it's only from the side of of righteousness or good, or it has to include all of the aspects for rectification to be real and complete. And but it's such an odd concept of, he had the key, he had the secret ingredients, the recipe, and he handed it over.
Right. There's got to be like some connection with this idea of met, right? And then merachepet with the 288 sparks being contained within it.
Oh, I never thought that. Yeah.
So I'm gonna read that. I'm gonna read that again real quick. So according to the Ari, this is page 83, 4 paragraphs down. It says, according to the Ari, this entire process of death and resurrection is hinted at in the word merachepet. As we saw, the first and last letters of this word spell met, dead. The 3 remaining letters are resh, pe, and chet. The numerical value of these three letters is 288. These are the 288 sparks of holiness inside the shattered vessels. The symbolic significance of the number 288 is alluded in the word Ibur, whose numerical value is also 288. Ibur means gestation or pregnancy, thus indicating that the broken vessels with their 288 sparks are similar to seeds that are planted in the ground. Although they may appear to be rotting, they are going through a process which is necessary in order to bring forth new life. The 288 sparks thus represent the profound concept of death and resurrection. On the level of Atzilut, it is by virtue of these sparks that the shattered vessels of Nekodim will be rectified as parts of Theme. So, like, Merachefet, right, is, met encapsulating the sparks of holiness. The sparks of holiness need to, if you will, be planted like seeds in the ground, which then die, but then they grow, and they become something more. And then going back to page 86, we've got the angel of death. The Talmud teaches that Moses was taught the mystery of the incense by the angel of death. It's for this reason that when a plague broke out among the Israelites, okay, so concept of 11 perfumes with the power to overcome death and evil. This is the concept that the 11 perfumes have the power to overcome death and evil.
In my studies, one of the interesting things I'd never really thought about before was this process of when Israel goes down to Mitzrayim, to Egypt, with 70 members of his family. That the Ari says that this is this whole process, the death, burial, resurrection kind of a ideal. That they go to a place of constriction, and he's like a microcosm of all the nations. He's a representative of all the nations in the world. So they go through this Mitzrayim, this place of confinement and judgment and purification. They go through the sea when it's parted, and that's kind of like Ghana, and then they come out very pure, and they've rectified, they've sustained, kind of like Adam was at that point. They're near the level of Adam and Chava in the Garden of Eden, sustained by food directly from heaven. And then when they go to Mount Sinai, they have to deal with that one last aspect, which is that the corruption that is present in everyone, that need for death, that need to free yourself from that corruption through the process of death. And when they get to Mount Sinai, Hashem speaks the commandments. They literally, in the Midrash, they die. They die twice, and they die and they're resurrected. They die and they're resurrected. So they've been elevated to this point of the state of Garden of Eden, and the whole world is this really whole. I'll print the. I'll have to link it too. It's on Chabad. It's called Conversation with the Soul. It's the teachings of Yitzhak Luria. It's very interesting. It talks about this whole process of how death, resurrection, burial, that whole process plays out in Israel coming out of Egypt.
I honestly never connected the idea of them dying and being resurrected, those two times, with the concept of that might in and of itself have been the thing that elevated them to the level, that high level, right, so to speak, that they were at, where it was as if the age of Mashiach had begun. But that fits, right? You need that death and resurrection.
And going back and using Rabbi Kessin's name again, he does talk about this idea, the state of this, and then that this whole process of going down, the famine, going to Mitzrayim, and coming out, that is like the purification of the neshama, of the levels of the soul, the nefesh, all of the levels of the soul. But they still have the corruption of this body to deal with, and that was dealt with. The final action was dealt with at Mount Sinai. But it's very never connected it either until I read all these different articles.
Well, my wife just found something that was quite interesting. There seems to be something to it. So it says the average length of human gestation is 280 days. And then if we add onto that 280, the 8 days up until the Brit, right, for a male child, that's 288. I wonder if there's some type of connection to be had there.
Well, in this whole process of refining, the RE uses the idea of pregnancies and different rates of gestation, in regards to kind of almost uses this, like, it almost sounds like an idea of cocoon, like a repair, like this. It's a hidden space, like hidden from evil, where it's like an embryonic stage where it falls to maturity and then becomes manifested. And the idea of uses the idea of like the pregnant male and the pregnant female. Not in a literal sense, but an idea of gestation, taking these base elements and forming something completely new. But, oh, 848.
If
288. Oh. Toby just pointed out 288. One of the gematria is since leaving the womb. So kind of birth. That's interesting.
Interesting. So 288 would be leaving the womb, and then there's a gestation of 280 days average, and then there's the 8 days till the Brit for a male child. But then there's also like you could. This is just kind of extrapolating here. I don't know if it's going anywhere or not, but if you think about it, we as souls are descending, right? We're going to a lower level, right? We're coming down to Atzilut, this not Atzilut, Asiya, this the lowest level, right? So that in itself is kind of like a death, so to speak. So you could even look at the whole gestation and pregnancy period and coming through. It's kind of wrapped up in Met at 288. Sparks of Holiness, 288 days. It seems to be some type of like interesting connections that we had there. But then you hear that have that language of going down, right? Because we know that dropping, I look at it as dropping frequencies, but dropping in a level, so to speak, is the idea of what a death is. But you hear you see this language using Torah for certain things, like Judah, right? Judah went down after the story of Joseph being sold, right? Judah goes down. He goes out of the land and he goes down. It specifically says he went down, and then that's when you have the story of his sons dying and Judah and Tamar. He goes down, and then all of a sudden, what happens from going down? Like, and it's like a spiritual ascent. We talk about it being that way, but then it's going. If I remember right, them going into Egypt is also considered going down, and there's also a comparison to. Is it Eliphaz? I can't remember his name right now. The father of the sons of the husband of Naomi and the father-in-law of Ruth. It starts off saying he left his people and he went down. So you see this kind of going down concept connected. Eric, you're really loud again. Sorry, man. You see this concept of going down and then coming back up, but then you see that kind of played out with this whole concept of the Messiah, because both of those sections with Judah and then with Ruth, they both connect to the Davidic line, and they both also connect to this idea of like being a negative thing, right? There's a lot of questions about that. We look at a lot of those that lineage. There's it's a spotty lineage. But then you got this great good that's kind of comes out of it. Just dots. All right, Eric, are you going to read some of those pages to us? No. Oh.
No, there's just an interesting excerpt from this book, Reincarnation of Souls here, and it's talking about Eber pregnancy a little bit, and it's just so esoteric there, it's hard for me to understand. So I'm just going to tell you it was there, and then I'm not going to read it to you. But but here's one from Meditation and Prayer, from the Light Beyond by the Ari, and or Kaplan rather, and here he's talking about what seems to be a related concept. He's saying, and this is from, this is a quote that he put in here from the Baal Shem Tov. I heard this from my master, the Baal Shem Tov. It was written, there is no righteous person on earth who does good and does not sin. Even when a person does good, it is impossible that this good not contain the sin of some ulterior motive. That is impossible. The Baal Shem Tov explained that when you do good without any evil whatsoever, the evil urge acts up against you. But when the evil urge sees that there is some intermingling of evil in your good, he leaves you alone. You can then complete the good deed and then do it for God's sake alone. Our sages teach us that Jews are thieves. In every good deed, you must swindle the evil urge. And so it's interesting. Here's what's interesting to me is that now here in this book, the Reincarnation of Souls, we have that same quote.
You got really quiet now, Eric. I don't know what happened.
That's so weird. I don't know what's going on. And so, can you hear me?
Okay, that's better.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, that's better.
I don't know what's happened. So, okay, it's kind of a long thing. I guess what I'm seeing is there's sort of a parallel idea here, and what Kaplan is bringing forward here in Interspace with the whole idea of pregnancy, and kind of what we're talking about here is sort of like it's almost like there has to be that intermingling of evil for almost anything to be able to be accomplished. So there's got to be some left side, some Gevurah, or something like that put to it. And so, okay, this is a really esoteric passage, but it's talking about Gevurah. And it's talking about, this is reincarnation of souls. Let's see. Elitzer, the son of Shattering, was spiritually impregnated in Yosef ben Shammai. So it's talking about, this is some of the reincarnation ideas in terms of the upper worlds. We know we're not taking that literally. Which is the secret of what is said in Tractate Shabbat 121a. If one happened that a fire broke out in the courtyard of Yosef ben Shammai, and the representatives of the king Sapori came to put the fire out since he was an officer of the king, he did not let them do so out of respect for the Shabbat. A miracle happened for him, and rain came down and extinguished the fire. When evening came, he sent each of the two selahs and their officer 50 gold coins. When the sages heard about this, they said that this was unnecessary, etc. He goes on here, but here it says, this Yosef ben Shammai was reincarnated of him, of Nakshan, and he saw that there is, here's the quote again, he saw that there was no righteous man in the world who does good, does not sin. Elitzer ben Sidor was also spiritually impregnated in the previously mentioned Yosef. Something strived against the Lord. Okay, he's talking about them in terms of like being men of renown and that type of thing. And it's just an interesting thing. I mean, he's talking about this impregnation, and it's along with this idea that no one does.
Did we lose Eric?
We lost him for a second. I don't know, Amy, if you can hear us. Let Eric know that we lost him.
I have a really cool commentary out of Kabbalah of Creation talking about this process.
Yeah, go for it while we're waiting for Eric to get back on.
So it's talking like the Ari and the whole Kings, the death of the Kings. It's a little bit to read, but it says, why did the Ari choose this obscure biblical episode to describe one of the most devastating moments in the biblical story of creation? Why didn't the Ari utilize the story of the Great Deluge, or the story of the Tower of Babel, or the killing of Cain by his brother Abel? Perhaps it is because a queen is mentioned for the first time in the biblical story, since queenship or sovereignty figures as the primary seal of the Kabbalistic reality map, that is, the tree of life. It was a perfect motif to include within its mystical system. It was also a wake-up call for all biblical exegetics. I can't pronounce that word. I'm sorry. To look at the Bible with new methodologies of mystical exegesis. If the Jewish mystic could look at an obscure biblical text and see within it a major cataclysmic event in the evolution of the universe, what else would the Bible reveal? The quintessential message of the is the holy relationship. The holy relationship is the sustainer and destroyer of the universe. If King Hadad survived this apocalyptic catastrophe, it was because of his queen Mehetabel. He also survived because his relationship gave him a good reason to survive. He had a purpose. That's my commentary. The seventh king was not alone. His concerns were not selfish and greedy as were those of the other kings. He had a balance to his goal and objectives with the queen. Thus, the text continues, by the time the spiring light reached sovereignty, it was contained within the sovereignty and was not destroyed. She was able to receive and bear the light. From this moment, a new paradigm, a new archetype in creation began in manifesting. This is the stage of tikkun, repair. The Ari reveals the real meaning contained in the embedded subtext in the biblical story of the death of the kings. They did not fully perish. They remained something alive and vibrant within this desolate remains of the shattered pieces. The shattered pieces are energy fields. Within them are forces that can obscure hope and light. There is another way of perceiving these shattered pieces. One can look at the after effects of death as the potential for spiritual work. He says, what is the work to be done? What can be done in this situation? The Ari explains, essentially within all moments of death and destruction, even that which is or seems to be overtly evil, there is a way of extracting the good within. This is called raising up the sacred sparks. Whether by eating food or praying or talking to someone, when one has the intention to raise this energy for the sake of heaven, this becomes the first step in tikkun, repair of all existence. The way of the Ari is this process of tikkun. The first step is through conscious awareness and mundane actions, and the second step is manifesting this intention throughout all relationships, beginning with oneself and proceeding outward to everyone.
So I have a question now, like that I should have asked earlier when we went through this section, but I didn't. It says, why do you guys think the 10 kings, that that there are the people that are used to like draw out this really deep kind of concept, especially with the primordial separate? Why do you think it's the kings of Edom, right? The kings of Esau. It seems interesting to me that it would choose Esau as that. And
Yeah,
I'm not going anywhere with this. I'm just curious, to be honest.
yeah. He says like why it's kind of an odd thing to, of all the passages, it's very obscure text, and right, it doesn't seem to have a direct relationship, but like kind of when you read these things, it's these history, how history unfolds, nations rising and falling, um, leaders becoming leaders of whatever nation. It seems like it's playing out a supernal script that was written in heaven. Like everything that we see before us has a pattern above. It's kind of like the program of a computer being executed and playing it out like some. I hate to use the word simulation, but you know, kind of like a simulation, that this is the coding above that he's referring to. All these concepts and these ideas can't function in this world unless they have some type of program to allow them to be a part of our reality. And so it's programming these different ideas and and possibilities in this world that's created through them. The idea, the program of free will and the program of sin and the program of tikkun. They have their own mechanisms and energies and boundaries and function within the system, and they're all interrelated. And that's where you get into the wrong call. This idea that if he had, if the wrong call had lived in the age of the computer, I think he would have been just overwhelmed with the imagery that we have around us to convey some of these mystical concepts.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
I'm just still trying to process out Esau. Why Esau? I mean, I get like chronologically, or I mean, at least in the it talks about kings before Israel ever had a king, right? And it has these ten kings. So I mean, I guess I
Yeah.
could kind of see it there that it's there. There's a chronological element. So yeah, that would connect to the primordial Sephiroth or the primordial vessels that broke. But then I'm just again just kind of pulling up from my memory banks everything I know about Esau, right? Esau was supposed to be from the left side, or was from the left side, right? And he was supposed to be that Gevurah side of Tiferet.
Mm-hmm.
And and what was the first shattering of the vessels? What was their problem? Well, there was no chesed, right? There was just Gevurah. They couldn't they could receive, but they couldn't release.
Yeah.
So they shattered, right? And then the sages talk about if the universe had been made with Gevurah, everything would be crushed. So you kind of see this kind of connection to maybe like the shattering of the vessels connecting a little bit, if you will, kind of to the left side. So why Esau? Well, obviously Esau was the left side. So is there anything to be kind of gleaned from Christianity, so to speak, and how Christianity is connected to Esau and Edom? And
I mean,
remind me. Oh, go for it.
look at Jacob wrestling. He's wrestling Esau's angel. It's
Mm-hmm.
not his. It's not
Satan.
his spiritual component that he's encountering.
Right.
He's encountering Esau's angel.
Right.
He's got to. He's got to bring. He gets the blessings from his father, and he gets the benefit of the wife of Esau's intended wife.
Right.
But he has to have the ability to have dominion or power over Esau in the spiritual realm, and that's kind of how that plays out.
Right.
And he doesn't come out whole. He comes out, there's something that happens where Jacob, it prevails, but at a cost. And it kind of like leaves this aspect out there that is yet to be dealt with.
Right. Well, I mean,
it's almost like
he
Esau
right up.
becomes. I'm sorry.
No. Finish your thought.
I was saying Esau becomes like the manifestation of the Sitra Achra in our world.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea is that it's not like, how do I explain it? It truly is the opposite of so it's the mirror. It's like it's an isomer in chemistry. Like it's almost it's literally the mirror reflected opposite of the true form. I don't know. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, it's good. I mean, and I'm remembering how Ariel Conaloro like refers to Christianity as naked truth, right? Being from the side of chaos, tohu, right? Right. We just read through that in tohu and vavohu, and they connect to tohu connects to being without form and that shattering of the vessels. And tohu means chaos.
Who teaches
So
that?
Ariel Conaloro, he talks about it, and I'm only now beginning to kind of like I'm remembering, and I'm not. When I've listened, I spent a lot of time listening to Ariel Conaloro early on, and I just had to put him to the side because he talked about these concepts. And I'm like, I have no idea what you're saying. And so he talks about like Christianity being naked truth, where Judaism is clothed truth, and so it's like a naked child. What does Judaism have to have? What's the point of this? This naked child running around, right? He talks about Christianity being from the side of chaos, from the side of tohu. So I'll bet he's getting it from this. I bet this is where he's making some of the connections, and a lot of these ideas he's getting. He's not. I mean, he's coming up with a lot of these ideas, but he's basing these ideas in what he's learning from his Rabbi Ginsburg. So now I'm going to have to go back and reassess some of this stuff from Ariel and get a better grasp on it. Because there's a lot of stuff, I mean, that I listen to from him that I just, it's good, but I don't have a way to unpack some of it. So, but I think this is a key to what he's talking about there. No answers, but it's just I'm just trying to piece this. Why Esau? Why? And you see Esau is obviously the left side. He's a restrictive force. He fails in what he was supposed to do. So that failure means that Jacob has to take on that role, but that role Jacob isn't able to really complete it, or fully, so to speak, because you can't do both Gevurah and Chesed at the same time, right? And so it passes on to Joseph, who takes on that role. But in Jacob being involved, that he obviously walks away with a limp from wrestling with the angel, but he defeats the angel, right? He doesn't give in. He doesn't let go until the angel blesses him. And it's after that the sages say that Esau was ready for repentance. He was like ripe for repentance. He was going to kill him, but then because of this thing with the angel, he shows up, and instead of killing Jacob, he kisses him, right? And he even and the sages say that he should have given him Dinah. If he had given him Dinah, then we would have seen the rectification. But he didn't. He hid Dinah, Jacob, and so it sent us out through this other cycle. I don't know where I'm going with this. I'm just kind of.
No, that's very interesting. I never like that. It's very interesting that you bring it down to that. But yeah, I mean, I've always wondered if Esau is supposed to be this restrictive force. He's emanating these effects of restriction in the left side. Then why is the spiritual child of Esau like this expansive chesed, without any Gevurah
Right.
kind of a manifestation? It's always been confounded to me.
Yeah. It's chaos, right?
Yeah.
But it's not chaos in the sense of just the way that we would normally refer to the term tohu, empty, darkness on the face of the deep. We mentioned tohu means chaos. It can also be translated as void, without form, is emptiness. This is the emptiness of a vessel ready to receive. The word bohu can be also read as the words bo and hu. Literally, it is in it. This is also because it is something that can hold the light in it. This tohu is the indeterminate state that leads to the shattering. Bohu is the rectified state of the vessels. In Kabbalistic terminology, this state is called the universe of tikkun, rectification. I don't know. I don't have anywhere to land this yet, but I got some more fuel to keep flying, I guess.
We're talking about the rectified vessels.
I was just going back and looking at tohu and bohu on page 82 under the sparks of holiness. It's the third paragraph down, trying to see if that kind of jogged any thoughts. With Esau being connected to tohu, which he obviously is because he's connected to the 10 kings, right?
Well, the Ari connects this process, the vessels. See here, they become these vessels that are shattered and then repaired. He says become divine archetypes, which are described as emerging and evolving out of these collapsing energies. The shattering of the vessels out of the so you get the Partsufim and some of these like these concepts coming, like the great face, the long breath, the divine mother, divine father, divine children, son, daughter. All these archetypes are created when these vessels are shattered and repaired. That this is the creation of these concepts in a primordial form.
Yeah, you actually brought me something that I want to bring up, because we haven't. The next chapter is on the Partsufim, so I don't want to get too deep into that. But one of the things, the way that I kind of interact with the Partsufim in my mind is that they're almost like what's the term I'm looking for? Anthropomorphisms, so to speak, of a human, right? The long face, right? So they go from being this nebulous vessel to almost being like having more human qualities to them. And for everybody listening, we'll get more into the Partsufim later. So and I still have a tough time grasping the Partsufim myself, but it says like the shattering of the vessels is page 85. The drama of the shattering of the vessels and their subsequent rectification of parts of theme, which could give as well as receive, thus serve as a spiritual blueprint for man's ability to overcome evil and become a vessel of godliness in the world. So it's like the blueprint of man is this being that has the ability to give and receive. But we also know that our soul and neshama reaches up to the highest level. So, but the vessels were created in this simple state that then had to be broken and then reorganized and being rebuilt. But that the rebuilding is going on. It's not like it was completed. But the building of the parts you feel, the rectification, if you will, is like ongoing. All right, that's just what I had that I want to.
Yeah. So the interesting thing is he talks about this these where the vessels weren't able to interact. Now they are for the first time, and they form these archetypal relationships. They're related like mother and father, sister, brother, son. You know, these kind of relationships, and they're not literally but these are the words and the function of these interrelated spheres where they never were able to relate to each other before. Now they can give and take from each other and to each other. And until I got this kind of understanding, it kind of gave me a lot of insight into the relationships that are, permissible relationships in the Torah and forbidden relationships in the Torah. That the way that these aspects of Hashem, these aspects of the Sephirot are being created, and we are able to manifest these personifications and do our own rectification by interrelating to others in a prescribed manner, in a holy way.
Mm-hmm.
How you raise your children and relate to your children, how you relate to your spouse, how you relate to your parents. I mean, these are all relationships that are directly addressed in the Torah, and they emanate from this idea of this first repair of these vessels at a really high level, and this personified relationships between these emanations.
Well, it's all rooted and grounded in the prime directive, right? The original purpose, which is to bestow. Hashem wanted to bestow the greatest amount of good that he could on another, and to be able to do that, well, what's the greatest good that there is? Well, it's himself, right? And so, if he's going to bestow the greatest amount of good on another, that other has to basically kind of be a mirror image, if you will, of himself. Has to have similarity to draw near. It has to be able to get as close as possible, and to get as close as possible to this, Hashem, to that good, you had to be like it, right? And because in the spiritual realm, there's no space, so the only way that you're near something is if you're like something. So, in order to do that, you had to create a man, but you had to create a man that had the ability to have free will and choose good and bad, and also be involved in a process of creation, right? We needed to be able to be not just receive, but also to give, and that giving be in the process of creation. And so we're getting kind of like back down to, it's all kind of like connecting back, if you will. That kind of concept grounds me a little bit in the idea of why are we talking about this? What's the discussion? Well, it's we're all discussing how that process works logically, how that process works of how God could create a being that could receive the greatest amount of good that's possible to give.
I have one other part I'd like to read out of that book,
Mm-hmm.
The Cabal of Creation, if I may.
Go for it.
So he asks at this end of the section about the shattering of the vessels, he asks a question. So the commentary is, the Ari continues in his discourse with a question. If it is true that God is perfect and never changing, as religious Jews proclaim daily, then why create a complicated universe that actually fails in its initial burst of creative display, i.e. the shattering of the vessels mentioned throughout the system? The Ari may have been inspired to expand and comment on the famous Talmudic statement that says, to paraphrase, God created and destroyed countless universes before this one. This is a proof text that enabled the Ari to establish the religious authority of his concept of the shattered vessels being an intrinsic stage of creation. Why is it important or necessary to have this blatant imperfection in the way God manifested creation? The Ari's answer was, for the possibility and privilege of having free choice. If it became known to humanity that the Creator failed initially with his cataclysmic mistakes and nevertheless recreated and reestablished existence as it is, then all human beings can do the same with their lives. Destruction leads to reconstruction. Despair is transformed into hope. Cynicism becomes optimism. Wrath is mitigated into harmony. Divine failure is God's way of creating the possibility within human consciousness of repairing what has been destroyed. It is up to those heroic individuals who are committed to rebuilding and remaking things better. It is to those people that the Ari's message becomes profoundly meaningful. Besides explaining the development of cosmic archetypes in philosophical discussions, there is a very detailed mechanical description of how these energies and archetypes came into being. So it's like spiritual astrophysics.
Yeah, I think it was in this book or somewhere, maybe it wasn't, but it was explaining how theoretical Kabbalah, at least, is, we talk about it as being mysticism, but it's actually it's just it's all really kind of grounded in Jewish logic, so to speak. On a high plane. It's not that there aren't mysterious aspects to it, like the whole concept of free will. How can we have free will is still, when you really get down to it, it's still a difficult thing for us to wrap our heads around because we're inside of it, right? And so there's still an element of mystery, but as much as possibly can be logically built out, that's kind of how the theoretical Kabbalah structure kind of works. I'm not just throwing it around.
I find it. I'm drawn to it because it has a practical application. It's not just some mindless exercise or abstract concept. It gives me the why of why the commandments exist. Like now you can get, if you understand the interrelationship of the aspects of God to each other, then you can understand why certain relationships are forbidden and why does God forbid homosexuality? Like why is homosexuality wrong? I mean, why? Right. What's the mechanism? Why if you love somebody, you should be allowed, but why would it be condemned by Hashem? And there's an idea here that it's a manifestation of an improper relationship in how the Sephirot were meant to interrelate. Right. So
it's giving you that model, that blueprint, so to speak, that then you can kind of hold it up to the laws or the mitzvot, and then you can start to kind of see their meaning, or they're where they are rooted in.
Yeah.
Eric, you're back.
Yeah, sort of. I lost my device there. I don't know what happened. So
did the phone die?
No, the phone is got full charge. So it's just I can't figure it out. I can't get back on with the phone. So I'll just kind of listen here. But but I just want to kind of finish the thought there, and actually the of the conversation here has actually helped me, and I was really struggling to put together what I was seeing there, and it's kind of helped a little bit. And what I was reading there in the one book concerning, it basically was saying if an action is too good, if it's all just 100% good, the takeaway from the idea is that basically the forces of the universe, this is just set up that it's not going to accept it. It's going to kick it back out. There has to be something that is constrictive, or something that is in that sense evil, that's attached to it, or it can't actually progress. It can't actually get anything accomplished. So it's just it's a kind of a weird concept, to add into the whole thing. But in a way, it's it's really fitting with all the other things we've studied and known. But the idea of the whole pregnancy thing, then, kind of what I was bringing into it is, we know that man, and it's the idea that, man can, does evil. He doesn't, it's just not always good. He's always doing evil. And so it's that idea that if there's not this back and forth, if there's not this, in a sense, this dichotomy of forces going on, then in a sense the program's going to kick it out. It's not going to allow for that, because at least the best of my understanding of what it was saying is that it's the same force that does not allow, that Hashem has put into the system, that does not allow all of himself to be bestowed upon it.
there has to be a limit. There's a filter on it, and when something's all good, it just the filter plugs up or the filter kicks it out, and doesn't allow for that. So this is this kind of feeds right into the whole thing with the forces of Esau and that kind of thing, and what we're talking about with earlier in the chapter with the tohu and bohu and breaking those down, in that those forces need a place to exist, and this is kind of why we were talking. I was talking with our old friend from Franklin today. We were talking about why these forces have to be, or the history had to play out the way it did, and that kind of thing. We look at how Christianity developed, and why didn't it do something different? Well, because it had to. There had to be a corresponding evil, and that in a sense it had to be. How do I say it? It had to be of sort of an equal force to, or an equivalent force or appropriate force to, the good that was taking place. And so, in terms of the whole tikkun of everything, the way, Rabbinic Judaism developed, the way that everything has taken place for the last, couple thousand years of exile, there's been a lot of evil force that's been involved with that. And in that sense, it's sort of the recognition that, there's this incredible force of good that's involved, but both intrinsically and externally to it, there has to be this mix of something else there, or it just, it just can't function, and so it kind of adds some perspective to why over time, why this is, why the whole tikkun and why the whole redemption process is taking so long. Why is it extended so much? Well, because there has to be this, this kind of mixing, this back and forth of the good and the evil, and so there has to be some outpouring, and then there has to be some constriction that goes along with it. So anyway, that's kind of the gist of what I was getting from it all, and it was this, the text themselves were kind of confusing, but it was it's to me it's a good thought.
If I may interject, Eric, that really gives me some awesome insight into in Sefer Yetzirah, where Ari Kaplan gives his commentary, talks about this idea of two disparate aspects, like fire and water being combined into a new entity, and the only created being in the universe, spiritual world, or this physical world is man. Man is the only creature that's capable of taking two disparate ideas and concepts and bringing them together and combining them, and that's the function of man. That was what man was created to do, and so being able to go to through this fallen world, which is manifested in a physicality in the physical world, man is the only creature capable of utilizing the physical world and elevating those sparks from physicality, as well as freeing sparks in the spiritual world by obeying other aspects of creation and the rules of engagement with the world. That really puts a new spin on that concept of physicality being necessary in man's role and function is just to do just that, to take these disparate elements that exist and bring them together in a holy fashion. Really cool.
Yeah, and without that process, we wouldn't have the opportunity to be givers. And if we didn't have the opportunity to be givers, then we wouldn't have the opportunity to receive the greatest amount of good possible from Hashem. Yeah. Like Muhammad Sufa, if the greatest shame, before creation, right? If you will, theoretically speaking, if us as souls existed, we enjoyed God's light, but we enjoyed it without any defect, if you will, which actually was a defect because we didn't have that ability to give and take. We just had the ability to receive. So that in and of itself was a defect. But how do you rectify that defect? Well, by creating other defects, if you will, and then giving us a job to do to fix those defects. We now can relate to Hashem in a way that we can earn that goodness. Anyways.
Yeah.
It gives us an interesting twist too on the 70 nations then, and the purpose and the function of the klipa that they're all under. The covers them all. And we go right from Nimrod, when everything kind of broke apart and spun off, and then when we look at the whole, we're looking at it in terms of the big picture of Rabbi Nachman's whole perspective on the tzaddikim, and that's made by the suffering of the tzaddikim, and that type of thing. And so there's these back and forth forces that are simply that are kind of maintaining a balance throughout history, but that's what's actually, in a sense, propelling history and mankind forward in a way that's actually developing the whole tikkun and developing the whole dynamic that is bringing about the gula.
What, Eric? What? How are you connecting that to the 70 nations? Would you just restate that thought?
Oh well, yeah. I mean, you look at okay, basically, we look at right alongside corresponding with Avraham Avinu, coming out of the his nation and being set apart and crossing over and that kind of thing. We also have Nimrod in the set, in his control over mankind and that kind of thing, and those type of things taking place that led up to Bavel and the breaking apart of mankind and the languages and that kind of thing to 70 nations, which ultimately every one of those linguistic distinctions brought some force with them. There was something that they took with them, and they were surrounded by they were put in darkness and that kind of thing. And we all know a little bit about the teachings of how the nations have these sparks, and the issue is that God has made the nations. He's put them in place. What does the scripture say? He's established the kings and their kingdoms and the time and the endurance of their reign and the parameters of their nations and that kind of thing. And so that's his work. It's something that he's established, and and it's for a purpose and a reason. And so we look at how they're all evil. Of course, we have certain other religious traditions that think everything should simply be proselytized into that one thing, whereas the more Kabbalistic approach would suggest that the nations simply need a tikkun. They need within the tradition that they have, they need a repair. And the idea is for the darkness that surrounds them and shrouds their traditions and their understanding, their perspective, whatever particular sparks of light of the whole big picture that it is that they're carrying, that needs to be exposed and, in a sense, clothed with the proper clothing. It's that function that will repair them before Hashem, what I'm saying, and bring them within, back into right relationship and that type of thing, and allow them to throw off idolatries and that kind of thing, and be a holy Gerim, a holy nation of of non-Jews that will be rectified to Hashem and still have that relationship. And so that whole process, which is bringing about that redemptive force that can bring that about, is we see the things that have to do with that in terms of the ideas of Mashiach ben Yosef being captive and eat with Edom and that type of thing, and we see this idea of tzaddikim being misunderstood, being misevaluated, and that kind of thing, and then of them actually suffering. There's great suffering of the tzaddikim that is an atonement. It's actually a part of the whole rectification process, and so it's just kind of there's a lot that one could say about it, but it's a really big picture. It's really a view that is, stepping way back and taking a very broad look at the big picture of things, and seeing that, along with this good force that's coming along through history, there has to be an evil force too. And it seems like, we look historically at when something really good happened, that good was blocked. It wasn't allowed to come to total fruition. It was almost like it was too good. There had to be something added to the mix that was evil, that was from the other side, that was really constrictive. And then all of a sudden it propelled forward historically into something else. And like Rambam's view of Christianity, that type of thing, and the force that it is, and that type of thing, and its role that it's playing, is a very interesting perspective on how that segment of the 70 nations is playing a very significant role. For example, and so in terms of what this all looks like for us, and at the point we're at in history and that kind of thing, we're kind of seeing this redemptive force taking place. And at this point, again, a lot of polarizing forces taking place in our lifetimes, and in the current events that we see going around us. And I don't know, it just seems to be really fitting. All these things that we're talking about in this segment seem to be, sort of patterning with that kind of thing. We're talking about pregnancy. We're talking about, this gestational type of forces that are taking place, and it all sort of just emulates from the the sort of the foundational framework of the universe, of the whole, all of reality. So.
Well, let me read a paragraph from Midrash Tanhuma real quick. Let me know if this is connecting to your thoughts as well on it, because you just kind of made me think about this. It says, when the Holy One, blessed be He, told Moses to build the tabernacle, all the Israelites brought their contributions. Some brought silver, others brought gold or copper or onyx stones or unset stones. They brought everything eagerly. The women asked themselves, what contribution can we make to the sanctuary? They arose, took their mirrors, and brought them to Moses. When Moses saw them, he became angry with them. He said to the Israelites, take your canes and beat them on their shoulders. What purpose do these mirrors serve? The Holy One, blessed be He, called out to Moses, and Moses said, Moses, do you mistreat them because of these? These very mirrors produce the hosts of Egypt. So I want to pause real quick. It says, what purpose do these mirrors serve? Talking about how the mirrors were used in Egypt to beautify the women, to for seduction purposes, right? You could put makeup on and stuff like that. So that's the connection is being drawn there. What purpose do these serve? Well, they're for seduction. So the Holy One, blessed be He, called out to Moses and said, Moses, do you mistreat them because of these? These very mirrors produce the hosts of Egypt. Take them and make a basin of brass and its base for the priests, that they may sanctify the priests from it, as it is said. And he made the laver of brass, and the base thereof of brass, and the mirrors of the serving women that did service, for they had produced all the hosts. Therefore it is written, and the brass of the offering was 70 talents. That is, the offering of the wives amounted to 70 talents. So basically saying, Hashem's response is, hey, if it wasn't for these mirrors, these women making themselves beautiful for their husbands, when their husbands came home from being worked to the bone every day, they wouldn't have gotten busy, for lack of a better term. They wouldn't have had all these children come out, so you wouldn't have had the hosts of Israel. And so these things, which looked like they had their root in unholiness or wickedness, right, actually had a root in great holiness. And it also connects them to brass, which, obviously the brass connects to the Nachash, the bronze snake. There's a lot of connections there, but then there's a connection to the 70 talents, right? So maybe the 70 nations. I don't know. I don't know if you're seeing any connections with that, but that's just reminded me of that.
one of the interesting to address Eric and the nations, their brother, I think his name's from teaching in 2012, 2013. He went to 9 different Arab countries. I was completely confounded by this travel plan. I think he started in Jordan and ended up being one of the last flights of spring when it broke out in Egypt. Lights out. But it's interesting. He took his travels and what he saw and he connected it to this idea of the rectification in the world to come. I'll have to put this link up too. But he talks about, he said the events around the world seem to be this idea of mida keneged mida for these for what the nations did in the past. And so all these nations are judged at different madregot or levels in the world to come. So they're judged at what level of attachment, like you said, they each have their own special level of spark of God within them. So they're judged according to how much of this holy energy, holy light, truth, whatever you want to call it, they received. And they're judged accordingly. So some of the manifestations that you see in the world, I know he does a lot, like his brother does a lot on Trump and North Korea, but he does this really amazing cure on what he saw in these nations and how their spiritual roots are manifested in some of the problems that they face today and why they're facing the problems they're facing today. They're not only judged for how they treat B'nai Israel, but they also are judged for the amount of truth that they've received from Hashem. So I'll have to attach that one too.
Yeah,
really
please.
Interesting sure.
I'd love to see it. Well,
it just reminds me of what you were talking about with the 70 nations, the 70 mirrors and their purpose and function. I'm trying to remember the source that I was reading this week, and I can't remember if someone posted it or if it's a source I have here that I was looking at. But it was what I was talking about is that the primary sin of the nations is all sexual, and it's the primary hang up. It's the primary thing that's going on there, and it was in the group. His big midrash somewhere, yeah. And so anyway, then the discussion was that something like that for Am Israel, the function is to overcome that, and they don't function on that level. And in a sense, that's the whole modesty issue, as opposed to what how the nations, so to speak, would use its mirrors. It's using them for a different thing, a different purpose, and that may not be a bad function for them, but the degree and the extent to which they take it maybe is not good. And so again, their aspect of that tikkun, of that whole dynamic that we see as a big picture of mankind, is to fulfill one side while Israel fulfills another side. And so we have the modesty of Israel, and then we have on the other side, in a sense, the seductiveness, so to speak, of the nations. And it is interesting that it takes 70 of them to offset the little tiny nation of Israel, or the force which Hashem.
Good deal. Well, it is 9:07. I think it might be a good time to pause. We've got probably one more section in the chapter on Adam and Chava, so we'll save that for next week. Anyone have any last thoughts they want to share before we end the live broadcast?
Awesome. Thank you so much.
All right, guys. Well, have a wonderful night. Shavua Tov.